Hello, and welcome to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Ellen Bailey, Vice President of Business and Culture Transformation, Harvard Business Publishing. We're excited to have Ellen with us for a keynote presentation titled Infusing DEI Across Your Business Practices. Welcome, Ellen. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. I appreciate it. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. As Nicholas mentioned, I am Ellen Bailey with Harvard Business Publishing. And I think while most of you know us for Harvard Business Review, we actually do have two other business units as well. In addition to the review, which I hope most of you are subscribers, we also have our education unit that distributes case studies and teaches the case study method to other universities outside of Harvard. We also have our corporate learning unit as well. And I mention that business unit in particular because that's where I have spent the majority of my time at Harvard Business Publishing. And so the corporate learning division that I was in, they create leadership and management solutions, leveraging HBR and HBS content for leaders at particular companies. And so I bring that up because I am a fairly new practitioner to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The majority of my career, I've been with, it'll be HBP, it'll be 12 years in September. The majority of my time here up until about 2019/2020 was solely focused on creating and designing solutions for leaders in corporations. And so literally a little bit about my journey, I was just feeling that at HBP, while we publish so much on things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and inclusive leadership, I felt honestly that we needed to do a little bit more for ourselves. It was one of those things that we were always focusing on helping others, but we weren't necessarily helping ourselves. And so I started this career shift and journey back in 2019. We know what happened in 2020, and so it kind of accelerated that shift from leading a global team designing solutions to leading this work. And to be quite frank, I think it's maybe served me well because I didn't know what I didn't know. And while I did spend 2019 getting quite a bit of formal education in this space, I'm coming into it a little bit differently. And I'm going to share some of those approaches with you today. So the three things that we're going to cover off on today, as based on the title too, is really how do we infuse DE&I literally, like for real, into the business. I know we talk about it a lot, but how do we actually do that? So practical application. And what are some of those actions that we can do to actually implement that? And then how do we manage stakeholders and make sure that the people around us are also driving the DE&I work? Because I know that there are a lot of external pressures right now to back up. We fortunately are not seeing as many social incidents, fortunately, so then it's not quite as much top of mind. So how do we just kind of work through that and keep our stakeholders motivated? So the good news, let's talk about what's working. So while it's devastating that George Floyd was murdered in 2020, as well as many other people over the years that have gotten attention, more attention than in the past few years, we are woke. Organizations are sort of woke. They initially put more resources. We have more DE&I practitioners than ever in this space. And so a lot of chief diversity officers are part of that executive team, right? They are chiefs, they report to CEOs, and they have a seat at the table. And diverse talent is in demand. And so some good did come of it. However, while we do have 64% of organizations still saying it's important, we are still feeling like we're not having the impact and the sustainable results that we should be. So what are some of the downsides, right? We are not always given the authority. So while there are more CDOs than ever, there are some folks that are directors, that are managers, that are leading the work that maybe don't have the decision-making authority. Even chief diversity officers that do have a seat at the table aren't always getting the resources that they need. And again, I think that we continue to like everything, things kind of die down. And when it's not in our face on social media, it's like, oh, are we still talking about that DE&I stuff? I'm hearing from folks that they're having DE&I fatigue, and that causes me to pause. Because this is my life. And as people say, oh, it's not personal. Well, it is, because I identify as she, her, and Black. And so, yes, it is absolutely personal. And so it is part of my life. And so it shouldn't die down. We shouldn't have fatigue. And so how do we think about things differently? And I stumbled across this video on YouTube with Stedman Graham, which some of you may know him as Oprah's partner. And it was literally an old video. It was a Deloitte interview from like 8 or 9 years ago. And Stedman Graham has put out his first book, and they're like, oh, Stedman, why is diversity and inclusion important to corporations? And I'm totally, paraphrasing here, but Stedman says something to the effect of, well, it should be a business imperative, and especially for global companies, we need to make sure that we represent a global audience and this and that. And we need to treat it, diversity inclusion, as any other business imperative. And I was like, oh my goodness. While that video is not even in high definition and it's fuzzy and it's from years ago, we're still saying the same thing. And I'm like, why are we still saying the same thing? And so many chief diversity officers, many leaders of this work in corporate have been doing great work. They've been working really hard. They have been pushing boulders up hills. So why is the narrative in 2023 the same as it was 8, 9 years ago when Stedman's book came out? And that has bothered me, because I feel that it was kind of an aha moment. I feel that even though our organization, to be quite frank, I love the fact that I don't get much pushback. We are all in on trying to do the right things right. We kind of grew really fast without thinking about how we grew, but not ill intent. And so I am very fortunate to have an executive team that is 100% supportive of the work we do. But I still was concerned that 8 and 9 years from now, if I retire, if our fantastic leaders that really help lead this work are no longer there, then what? It's too reliant, I'm afraid, on the people. And how do we then really truly think about this differently so that we have sustainable change, so that we can continue to build and build and build, and we're not still talking about the same narrative? So as I continue to do research, and continue to talk to, obviously, folks at HBS, as well as all of you that do this work outside of Harvard, of the Harvard system, I'm really trying to find out what works. And I'm like, you know what? To overcome a lot of these challenges that we have, I think we need to change the trajectory. And this is when me being maybe a little bit new to the space is to my advantage, because I'm like, why haven't we been able to have that impact that we should have been having? If we were able to have had great depth and sustainable impact with our DE&I work up to the point of when George Floyd got murdered, then in theory, we should have been doubling down. Back to organizations are woke. If we were doing the right things right, would we have been woke? And so this is not at all critical of our DE&I leaders. It is the fact that we have not provided them this support to be able to create sustainable change, I think, that needs to happen. So I just keep having these little aha moments. And so I just started piecing them together. So I had the aha moment when I stumbled across the Stedman video. I had a second aha moment when looking when I ran across this Jeff Bezos quote. So regardless of what you think about Jeff Bezos, he does say good intentions don't work, mechanisms do. So I'm like, okay, so we're still the same narrative from Stedman. Good intentions don't work, mechanisms do. And then I was talking with Hayes Gibson at Harvard Business School, and he was sharing that there's a methodology that he uses, that he teaches, that is also used in the military, which is a decision-making framework. And he's like, you change the processes, not the people. And he gives this fantastic example that when you are assigning a project, when you are giving anybody some sort of work assignment, you share the what, why, and the how. And I'm like, yeah, as we all do the what, why, and the how. He goes, no. You share what needs to happen, why it's important, why we're doing this, but not how you need to do it, but how it needs to end. When you share the what, why, and the how it needs to end, you then give autonomy to the people on how they get to that result. So that infuses, it helps build trust, because folks are like, oh, wait, you trust me to make the decisions necessary on how we get to the end result. People also feel valued, because instead of having like a checklist or a to-do list, they now are like, oh, wait, I can actually use my brain, and I can actually use the diversity of thought and the thought leadership that you hired me for. So all of these things kind of converge for me. And I was like, you know what? We need to do things differently. And so let us shift at HBP how we think about this work. While all of this is kind of noodling in my head, and I'm continuing to whiteboard in person and virtually with my team, because I'm located in Dallas, Texas. I have team members scattered all over. And so as we are continuing to whiteboard and think this through, the article from Lily Zeng comes out on Avoid DE&I Backlash, Focus on Changing the System. So I'm like, okay. And then lastly, what really nailed it was we also in 2022, got a new CEO, Layla Worrell. And so all of this, during this time where we were thinking about what we need to do differently and why, Layla comes in with a very aggressive strategy that requires us to be crazy agile, change ready, innovative. And some of those things we're not great at, because we are steeped in research, for goodness sake, right? And so how can we then have a full-on transformation effort that will help us change the systems as well as the culture? So let me press pause really quick and share with you what our core strategy is, and then we'll go from there. So we created this strategy back in 2020. We diversify, we include, we thrive. We feel this still holds true. No matter what the external pressures, no matter what we are doing regarding transformation, we need to continue to drive an inclusive culture. We follow the book and the inclusion dial, kind of looks like a speedometer, from the book Unleashed with Frances Fry and Ann Morris. And the goal is to foster a place where people feel psychologically safe, welcome, celebrated, and cherished. Unwavering. And that is not specific to race and ethnicity. That is everyone in our organization. The bar and the goal is for every single person to feel celebrated and cherished in our organization, so that you have that sense of belonging, so that you can thrive. We have diversity and representation as a second pillar of our strategy. And this is both internal and external. It's kind of twofold. Yes, we want to continue to diversify the population at Harvard Business Publishing globally. We have just shy of 600 people, about 450 to 500 are in the US, the rest are global. So we want to make sure that we continue to diversify the representation that we have within Harvard Business Publishing. However, the second piece of that is we need to continue to diversify our contributors that we publish, to make sure that we are continuing to represent society globally. And then third, last but not least, all of these weigh equally. They get equal amount of resources, whether that's time or money, is social impact. And so we have an obligation to leverage our thought leadership and our influence for good to be able to really focus on one area, and that is to close the education gap. If we help close the education gap, not just in the US, but globally, we will then in turn then close the wealth gap. And the sticking point for me on this was a study done in 2020 where the average net worth of a white person in Boston is $247,000. That is a 2020 statistic. The average net worth of a Black person in Boston is $8. 247,000 to 8. I'm sure many of you today have heard that statistic. I think it bears worth repeating. I repeat it as often as necessary because that is shocking and nauseating. And so it's like, wait a minute, this goes back to Jeff Bezos, right? Let's look at the mechanisms because that just shows that our system is broken. And so how can we best influence that? And education is what we do. So that's what our focus is. So I say that because as we change how we get this work done and how we literally infuse DE&I into the work, these three pillars still hold true. So all of the work we do, we make sure goes to these three pillars. So this is phase 2. I'm going to come back to phase 1 towards the end. So how do we know this is going to work? And when we think about things differently, what do we have to base that on? So I'll tell you what does work and what has worked for us. So we have a fantastic CHRO, Angela Chang-Simony, and we partnered, we were just connected at the hip. And so Angela and I reported to Angela as our CHRO, as well as had a dotted line to our CEO. And so Angela and I and the entire HR team worked really hard over the course of a year and a half to infuse DE&I into all of our people practices. And so we continue to get feedback around promotions. People don't feel promotions always go to those who deserve them. They feel that they don't always get the proper promotions that they deserve. And so it was like, wait a minute, let us look at literally infusing DE&I into all of our people practices. So that's what we did. So thanks to Susanna and Marianne Amato and a lot of the teams that we have within our HR organization, Lori, et cetera, our recruiting team, we were able to do just that. So we changed our recruiting practices. We created career ladders and development processes so that people are being evaluated based on fact and not based on a personal opinion. We also have changed some of the other practices as far as equitable pay and all of those types of studies as well. So we wanted to make sure that we infused it into all of our people practices. Check. That doesn't mean we're done, but it means we're off and moving, we're off and running with that. That is now continue to maintain and improve. That's phase 2. So now we are embarking on phase 3. How do we take that, all of those best practices that we learned by infusing it into our people practices and infuse it into our business practices so that we can leverage the diversity of thought, everybody feels included. And if they feel included, then hopefully the result is a sense of belonging where they can thrive. So then as a result of that, we needed to shift the work. As we have been shifting the work, then we created kind of this inclusivity framework. So strategy plus mechanisms plus culture equals success. So you have to have a strong strategy, which we do. You have to have mechanisms that support the people and the work in a way that facilitates their best. And then you have to have this great inclusive culture so that you can really leverage that thought leadership and give people that sense of belonging and value that we all strive to have. Only when all three of these components are in place can you be successful, can an organization be successful. So you need to have that strong strategy and those strategic goals kind of first. Then what we are doing is we are really focusing now on that mechanisms and culture. And initially I was like, I think it's two different work streams, right? Like I think we work on the business transformation and we work on the culture transformation. And I'm like, yeah, no, as I continued to brainstorm with my team and the more we talked about it, it's like, that's actually one work stream. Because what we need to do is, which is what we have done, is we have taken all of the data that we have conducted interviews across the organization and identified the key areas that are not working as well as they should. And so what is preventing us from being our best selves, both on the business side, and when I say mechanisms, that's systems, technology, processes, procedures, as well as the cultural side. And then as we change them and we change the actual systems and the processes, we make sure that we infuse those with DE and I so that it's actually built into the process so that it is less burdensome on the people. So then all of us that are trying to do the right things right, all of our individual contributors, all of our leaders in the business, they're like, yeah, I'm trying really hard, but I'm not really sure what to do. Okay, we've made it a lot easier because now we've built it into the process. So this gets into the depth of how we work. And there's lots of other things that come into that, right? There is a transparent communication. You still got to keep those people processes going, all of that. But to do this change, then we felt that we needed to shift. So shifting to report into our operating team. So I now report to our Chief Operating Officer, Ellen Demaray, who is fantastic, and have the dotted line back to Angela, the CHRO, to make sure those people practices, we don't lose momentum there as well. Because our team needs to be part of the operating team if we're going to change how we operate. And as we change how we operate, not only are we focusing on the DE and I, but we are aligning it and making sure that we are cross-referencing it with our strategy and our goals to make sure that we can attain that. And that is our focus. And that's how we're going to kind of change in how we think about this a bit. And people ask me all the time, well, where's all the programming? Like, what about all the speaker series? It doesn't go away. Diversity, equity, inclusion is part of the culture work. So all of that still stays. We now address the business piece as well. So some examples, I mentioned the career ladders to drive equitable promotions. Our values replaced our old school competencies. So we also have new values, a new mission, a new purpose statement that is reflective not only of who we are, but who we aspire to be. So by the values, we do what's right, we do what's hard, we do it with excellence. By those replacing our competencies, we are all evaluated on these quarterly, twice a year, and at the end of the year, because we know the bottom line is what gets measured gets done. The decision-making process I mentioned from HIES. We also have put in place things like a supplier diversity program. And while again, everybody's like, oh yeah, yay, supplier diversity, let's do it. We have been working to get a new tool. So again, back to the processes, now we have a tool that people can go to find suppliers, to go out to bid. And this tool, you can sort by the type of work you need as well as diversity. And so by having this tool, we were able to then infuse that into the process, which will then get different results. And then we also crowdsource solutions. So this was actually phase one. When I started on this journey in 2019 and 2020, I was a team of one. And so I really needed help. And so I leveraged a group of ambassadors to help us identify what our strategy should be, to help us identify what a good culture looks like. And so we still use that. We asked for applications for people to be on the values team, our hybrid go back to work team. And so we continue to leverage our people to help us identify the changes that need to happen. So what are some indicators of progress? We continue to check in on the inclusion dial, as I mentioned, retaining staff, hiring staff, all of those things that I talked about that are in those people practices that we've infused right now. And so then how do we actually measure those things? We measure those by a voice of employee survey annually. We also have check-ins. We are part of the MLT Black Equity Workplace Certification. We look at our internal mobility and our retention rates. So that is the work that we are doing here at HBP. And last but not least, I'll share some of the myths I think that we've been able to debunk, and we are going to continue. DEI needs to be its own function. You have to report directly to CEO. I'm not sure. I think it's about the person and the people and the work that you're trying to get done, and what is the best place for you to sit and who can you collaborate with. DEI is solely the responsibility of CDO? Absolutely not. Culture change is a top down? No. Crowdsource. It takes all of us. It takes a village as we think about that. And DEI training doesn't work. Doesn't work for what? We need to continue to have programming. We need to continue to challenge our thinking. We need to continue to increase our sense of awareness. So with that, continue to use the business to drive the change, continue to engage your stakeholders. And while we are never going to get it all right and we're never going to be perfect, go. And as Francis Fry and Ann Morris say in the book Unleashed, it's better to go and to be making some progress than not at all. So don't be afraid to try something new. So thank you for that. And I think we've had quite a few questions come in. Lindsay, if you want to fire some at me, I'm happy to take what we could, or Nicholas, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Yeah, we do have some questions. And here's one from the audience. How do we battle against senior leaders who don't see it as an urgent priority? Say, for example, if the business isn't performing well, and they keep trying to put it on the back burner despite your best efforts to push it forward.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that is when we position it as culture. All of the data shows, and there are a million articles in HBR as well as other publications that show that if you do not have a strong culture, it can sabotage all of the good work that you do. And so you have to have a strong culture. The old phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so that goes back to me every day. I think I present the business case, and I do focus on that business case, and we have to shift our culture to be able to facilitate the best from our people, which will improve productivity and get better business results.
Great. And here's another one. Can you recommend some best practices for a small to medium-sized company for tracking DEI progress/effectiveness?
Absolutely. So honestly, the number one thing we do are the one-on-one interviews. I love setting time aside and just doing those pulse checks every single quarter, ideally. And I would say at least every other week, I'm having some one-on-one conversations. So I think that data is great because it to me is worth more than a survey, because you get the context that goes with it. And then you actually do start looking at your data. Look at people, how long they've been at a company, have they had any mobility opportunity, and your retention rates as well. So retention, mobility, and then do the one-on-one interviews to get the testimonials and context on how people are feeling.
Great. And here's another one. What's the biggest mistake you've seen companies make in trying to make quick changes to their organizational culture? And how do they get past it?
Yes. And by the way, we have misstepped on more than one occasion. And I said when I took on this role to the executive team from day one, I'm not going to get it all right. I will make mistakes. But what I will do is commit to quickly course correcting. And so when doing that I think is what is most important. There are two things that I think that we have done that I see other organizations as well. And one is jumping right in, assuming everybody feels and believes the same way I do, and that people have the same level of understanding. It's like, oh, wait, nope, not everybody believes in this work or thinks the same way. And so that is the number one mistake that I see. And so take the time to provide the context and to bring people along with you. That takes patience, which I don't always have necessarily, but take the time to share the business case as well as the moral case. Talk specifically about how it will help them personally and professionally, them and their teams, and bring them along versus assuming that everybody's at the same place you are.
Great. I think we can squeeze one more question in. How do you anticipate the DEI field evolving over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think due to external pressures and affirmative action, that we are going to have a harder road, honestly, that we've even had the past few years. And so I think that we do need to shift how we think about this work, and we do need to embed it so that no matter what the external pressures are and what happens, we know that we are still driving and can still have that sustainable impact. And so that 8, 9 years from now, we're not saying the same thing and we don't have the same narrative that we heard from Stedman Graham.
Great. Well, thank you again, Ellen, for such an incredible keynote. And I want
Yeah.
to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.